I've heard it said all my life, you can't cheat an honest man. And like all these old sayings, there's a lot of truth in it. There are no doubt exceptions. It's quite possible, I think, to cheat an honest man, but that's not the man, usually, who winds up being cheated. There is a lot of truth. Con artists always look for the person who is trying to get something for nothing. And they're especially happy if they can find someone who's willing to bend the law a little bit in order to get it. Because when the sting comes down and when they find out that they have been defrauded, they are afraid to go to the authorities because they themselves were in the process of trying to break the law. The book of Proverbs speaks of the man who says, it is not, saith the buyer. But when he goes his way, he boasts. We're always willing to talk down something we're getting ready to buy because we like to buy it for less than it's really worth, right? There is a little bit of larceny, it seems, in a lot of it, because we would like to try to, if we have something, we want to sell it for more than it's worth. If we're trying to buy it, we want to buy it for less than it's worth. And there are some fascinating stories. You're all familiar with the story of how many times the Brooklyn Bridge has been sold to someone who comes along and wants, says, I'll sell you the bridge, and you can charge tolls going across it. There's so many thousand cars a day, et cetera, et cetera. And you can get $1 a piece from each of them. You get your money back right away. And sure enough, I guess deals have actually been concluded. I'm not sure about the Brooklyn Bridge, but I do know that the Eiffel Tower was sold once by a con man. Somebody representing himself to be in the French government and operating on the QT, and of course this is all on the QT. We can't let the public know because there would be a terrible outcry if they found we were going to tear down the Eiffel Tower. But the fact is, a lot of people think it's an eyesore, and look at all that scrap metal. And in fact, it was a scrap metal dealer to whom the Eiffel Tower was being sold. And I forget the story. It's been a long time since I read it, but as best I recall, the Eiffel Tower was sold to this man, and the man that got the money disappeared. So it is, as I said, there is a little bit of larceny in a lot of us, and when we get a deal that's too good to be true, usually it is, but even though we know that, sometimes we just can't stand it. We have to have a bite at it. It's like that old bass that sits by the stump day in, day out, and you drag the worm by him again and again and again, and he can resist it for a long time, but one day he finally decides he's got to have it. Well, so it goes with people. And of course, many of us have been had by these 20% off and 30% sales. The sales where somebody is going out of business, and you come back 6 months later and they're still going out of business, and you come back 2 years later and they're going out of business again. In fact, I think there's a place that's been going out of business for at least a year, right down here at the corner of the Loop and Old Boy Road, if I recall. It's a Mexican imports type of place, and they are still going out of business. Now, of course, when they actually will get out of business remains to be seen, because for some reason they cannot resist continuing to buy this stuff down in Mexico and bring it up here to folks and sell it to them at reduced prices. First of all, they mark it up 3 times, then they reduce it by 50%, and it works out real well. You're all familiar, I think, most people got around to seeing the movie The Sting some years ago. It was a fascinating premise in the movie, and it really illustrated, as well as anything could ever illustrate, the nature of what we're talking about. These people, when they finally decided, and they put together the group of people to try to perform the big con, we're going to try to perform this big con on a big-time criminal. And they researched this man. They followed him. They studied him. They examined him carefully, trying to find the way in which they were going to get to this man. And one of the scenes you may remember in the movie, when they'd gotten together and they were running down the list of all the things they had, and they finally said, well, every week he takes this train, and he has this poker game on the train. And they were going back and forth about the poker game and how they played it and how they arranged it. And finally this guy with a knowing look in his eye looks around the table and said, he cheats. All of a sudden, they knew they had the way in which they were going to go about getting this particular man. When they found that he liked to cheat when he gambled, they knew that he has a vulnerability in that area. Now, there is, in this world abroad, the greatest con artist who ever lived, who understands the confidence game better than anyone who's ever lived, better than any man, better than any group, better than any writer, any mystery writer, anybody else. He actually tried to work a con, if you will, on none other than the Son of God, Jesus Christ. When Jesus had been fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, we are told that Jesus was afterward hungry. He actually wanted to eat. And a con man walks up to him and says, "You're the Son of God. Command that these stones be made bread." And Jesus replied, "Why, it's written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God shall man live." Now it is interesting that he came to Jesus and he went right straight to something, to the first thing that Jesus wanted. You know, it's really be difficult to con you on something where you had no desire, wouldn't it? How do we go about deceiving you into making a mistake, a slip, or doing something on a basis of something you don't even want? There is no temptation. There's no desire. There's no weakness. There's no vulnerability. You go after something they want. And so he did. You would like bread. You're hungry. I can see that. Command that these stones be made bread, and we'll be on our way. And Jesus' reply, we've repeated again and again and again. And of course, he took it straight out of the Old Testament. Jesus listened further as the devil talked to him further. He took him up to the holy city, and he set him on a pinnacle of the temple, and he said to him, "If you are the Son of God, cast yourself down. It is written, He will give His angels charge concerning you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest at any time you dash your foot against a stone." Throw yourself down. Now, I can't imagine anybody wanting that, but the demonstration of power, the proving of the Bible, the showing that God could actually do this, apparently was a temptation. Go ahead, do it. He said, "It's also written, you shall not tempt the Lord your God." Again, the devil takes him up to an exceeding high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and all the glory of them. And he said to them, "All these things will I give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus did want that. Because, in fact, this is what the whole thing was all about. Bread was a minor want. But the want of the qualifying to rule the world and to do it right was there, because that's why he came. It's a part of the whole message. It's a part of his whole being and what he existed for. I'll give it to you if you'll fall down and worship me. And Jesus said, "Get hence, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, him only shall you serve." Now, he was not successful, this con artist was not, because although Jesus had wants, although he had needs, although there were supposedly areas of possible vulnerability, he did not want them that way, and Satan failed. He was, of course, considerably more successful with Eve. Now, you're so familiar with this, I almost hesitate to ask you to turn back to it, but I want you to anyway, to the 3rd chapter of Genesis. Because there is an important thing that comes out of this discussion, both with the incident of Jesus in Matthew 4, where I just was, and in Genesis 3. The serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, "Has God said to you, you shall not eat of every tree that's in the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We can eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat of it, you shall not touch it, lest you die." The serpent said to the woman, "You shall not surely die. For God does know that in the day you eat thereof, your eyes shall be opened, you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." And the woman looked at the tree. She saw it was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, a tree to be desired. She wanted it. It was desirable. It looked like it would be good. And what he said it would do certainly sounded good. So she took of the fruit thereof, and ate, and gave to her husband with her, and he ate. And the eyes of them both were opened. What is remarkable about these is that our con artist, whom we know as Satan, the devil, in both instances, with Jesus and with Eve, meticulously told the truth. Now we are, prone to, and justifiably the Bible says he is a liar and the father of liars, and we think of Satan in terms of being a liar. And therefore, when he comes along and tells us the truth, we are in some measure disarmed. He tells you the truth. For in fact, see, when he talked to Jesus, he said, it is written. He will give his angels charge over you. They will bear you up, lest you cast even your foot against the stone. You can't get hurt. He told the truth. He told Eve, if you eat that fruit, you will not die, and your eyes will be open. She ate the fruit, her eyes were open, and she could check her pulse, and she was not dead. He told her the truth. Oh, agreed. It was the truth with a twist. It was the truth out of context. It was part of the truth as opposed to being the whole truth. It was the truth misapplied. It was the truth. You can hang whatever appellation on you want to. But the point is that the good con man comes and he tells you the truth. Merely because someone comes along and tells you the truth does not mean you are not about to be deceived. It comes as a little bit of a shock to realize that the truth can be used to deceive. But when you think about it, it may be one of the most effective tools to use in deception. For the person who comes and lies, if he is found to be a liar or found out, or if you already know better, he has lost all possibility of having any influence on you at all. The truth can be one of the most effective tools, properly used, to deceive. What is also surprising, even the law of God, although, and we must consider it as a part of the truth, must we not? Even the law of God can be used as an instrument of deception. Now, no one has been more diligent to preach the law of God than I. Well, I won't say no one. I can't speak of everybody, but I certainly feel I have been diligent to preach the law of God. I believe in the law of God. I can sing the 119th Psalm right from the shoelaces with every fiber of my being to believe that God's law is good and right and is the way of righteousness and that one should keep God's law. But there is a peculiarity about this. Who of all people alive in Christ's day was more diligent to observe the Sabbath day than were the Pharisees? Who was more careful about the holy days? Who was more meticulous in the observance of the tithe? Who was it that was so careful about not eating with unwashed hands that they scrubbed their hands and they scrubbed all the way up to the elbow and they would never eat unless they first washed thoroughly? Who was it who would have died, would have gone to the stake if they had to avoid eating unclean meats? They were called Pharisees. All. And I tell you categorically, they were all deceived. They were deceivers themselves, and they were deceived. They had the hold of the truth. They had it in their hands. They read it. They tried to live by it. And Paul, of course, in one place says, the law is good if a man use it lawfully. The Pharisees had taken the law and used it in ways that God never intended. Now you have to hearken back to that and wonder, how did this work? How did it happen? Well, if you understand that one of the things the Pharisees wanted, and Jesus tells us what they wanted, he said, what you love is to be admired. You love to have the chief seats. You love to have men bow before you and say, Rabbi, and then Rabbi this, and Rabbi that, and Rabbi sit over here, and to be honored, and you give honor back and forth to one another constantly. You keep the law as a means of making yourself better than other people. The law has become a point of superiority. The law has become a point whereby you have thought you have achieved your own righteousness, and you have not submitted yourself to the righteousness of God. And even the law is not perfect proof against deception. There was a day I remember I was on a visit. I can't remember exactly where I was at the time, but I remember the man, and I remember the story so vividly. I told it before, but it's very relevant here. This man was hitchhiking in West Texas. Actually, I think more back this way, down towards the hill country. And he'd been in and stopped into a restaurant at noon to have lunch. And he'd gone back out of the restaurant, and he was standing on the roadway hitchhiking. And as he stood there, all of a sudden he went into a trance. This is his story to me. And an angel appeared to him, I guess standing between a couple of parked cars by the roadway there, and told him that he was making a mistake by not tithing, and that and gave him a commandment to start paying tithes. And the guy said, he told me about it when I was talking to him later on. He said, now that had to be of God. He said, because he told me to do what the Bible said I ought to do. And he said, I've tithed ever since, and that was something I know that was of God. He said, don't you think so? And I said, no, I don't. He said, why? My answer, why would God need to send you an angel to tell you something he has already told you in the pages of the Bible? Think about it. When Lazarus, in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, here's Lazarus in Abraham's bosom, and they look across this chasm, in Abraham's bosom, in the chasm with the rich man. And he said, look, if you won't send Lazarus over here to cool me down, he says, send him to my brothers. I don't want them to come to this place of torment. The reply, he said, let them hear Moses. If they will not listen to Moses, they will not listen if a person was risen from the dead. And a man who refuses to hear the biblical commandment to tithe is not going to get an angel from God to tell him to tithe. Now I can already hear your next question. Well, why in the world would the devil ever tell a man to tithe? Think about that one for a little while. Can you conceive of why he might? Well, in the first place, maybe he didn't. Just between you and me, I have no idea whether that man saw anything standing out there by the roadside on that day. I do know that he was spiritually one of the most arrogant people that I have ever met. He was completely brittle and totally unteachable. The fruit of whatever experience he had was that he knew all there was to know and could not be taught anything else, and there just wasn't any way. I didn't necessarily come in there as a great one to teach him anything, but he just could no longer learn. Now, I can see maybe that if this man has this want, what is it? A want to be important? A want to have a vision. But why does he want to have a vision? Well, he might want to have a vision because that's pretty exciting stuff. That means that I'm pretty special. I'm special to God because God gave me a vision. He didn't give you one. So I am more special than you are. Now, if I were the devil and I saw a man with that kind of want, and for whatever reason I might want the man, or for whatever reasons that the devil, who knows what the devil wants and why he wants it. But if I wanted him, one way of getting him is simply to tell him to do the right thing. Think about it. You tell him the truth. You don't lie to him. You can look in the Bible and find your lie. You tell him the truth, and you get him to listen to you on the truth. But he's doing it for pride. He's doing it for arrogance. He's doing it for superiority. You have accomplished your mission as effectively, maybe more effectively, than if he had never tithed at all. It's a shocking thing to consider, but whenever I saw the fruits in that man's life, I had to consider it. I had no other choice. So the truth can be used to deceive. The law can be used to deceive. And even power, miraculous power, astonishing power, can be used to deceive. A vision by a roadside. A miracle of changing water into wine. A miracle of whatever it may be that a person can perform for you. Recall, when Moses went into Egypt, the Pharaoh's magicians were able to duplicate all sorts of the same miracles that God gave him. They were able to duplicate in their way. Now, would you turn forward to Deuteronomy, the 13th chapter? I've often been fascinated by, if you're visiting as a field minister, you come into contact with people again and again who have had dreams, visions, special revelations from God. And they've experienced miracles in their life. And of course, always people want to think in terms of these miracles, these miraculous interventions, these strange intersections with another world, as it were, or another dimension, as somehow a validation of their relationship with God. Read in Deuteronomy 13 and verse 1. If there arise among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and gives you a sign or a wonder. Now, if I come along and I gave you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder didn't come to pass, you would immediately have a pretty clear idea of what I was up to, wouldn't you? You would immediately know from the Bible tells you categorically. Somebody comes to you and gives you a prophecy, the prophecy doesn't come to pass, he says, don't be afraid of that man. He didn't have any power. You don't have to worry about a person like that. However, this isn't about that. He says, if he gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder come to pass, then by all means, shouldn't you follow that person to the ends of the earth? Shouldn't you concede that if a person comes to you and gives you a sign or a wonder, he calls down fire from heaven and consumes the courthouse at noon tomorrow? Whatever it is that he's going to do, he actually can take hold of cast a rod on the ground and have it become a serpent. He can grab it and have it become a rod again in his hand. Boy, that's a man you ought to follow, right? Wrong. Notice what it says. If the miracle come to pass whereof he spoke to you, saying, let's go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God proves you to know whether you love him with all your heart and all your mind, with all your heart and all your soul, and you shall walk after the Lord your God, fear him, keep his commandments, and obey his voice. What's important about this verse, this chapter, this passage, is that it tells you in no uncertain terms that miracles, manifestations of spiritual power, can be used as instruments of deception, plain as the nose on anyone's face. Turn back to Revelation, the 12th chapter. These are some of the most powerful scriptures related to this you'll ever find, and it is strange to me, as much attention as Revelation has gotten, how poorly understood these scriptures are. In chapter 12 of Revelation, verse 9, the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth. His angels were cast out with him. How did he go about deceiving the whole world? Chapter 13. And we begin reading in verse 11. I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb. He spoke as a dragon. He exercises all the power of the first beast before him. He causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He does great wonders, in that he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceives them that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, they should make an image to the beast that had a wound by the sword and did live. How? How did he deceive them? Miracles. He calls down fire from heaven. I'm telling you, I would be impressed. I would be staggered if I saw someone perform a miracle like that. I hope that I would not consider that a validation of his authority. I hope that I would not consider something like that as meaning that God somehow approves of what this person has done. And it is odd, strange, how many people there are on this world who believe that miracles and signs demonstrate and prove that a man is of God. I think if you go taking a poll, just make you start down through the mall down here and get out a pad and a piece of paper and start taking a poll to find out how many people who are Bible-reading people would believe that miracles and signs, calling down fire from heaven, would demonstrate that a man was a prophet of God. How many people would tell you, yeah? In 2 Thessalonians, it's emphasized in a very powerful way. This is the scripture having to do with the man of sin and what he is to do. Beginning in verse 7, For the mystery of iniquity already is at work. He who now lets will let him be taken out of the way. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders, in all deceivableness of unrighteousness in those who perish, because they receive not the love of the truth. You know, the fact is, when you actually get down and look at this, there is a vulnerability. There is an opening in people that makes them vulnerable to being deceived by someone that comes along and tells them the truth, by someone that teaches them to keep the law, by someone that demonstrates miraculous power, by someone who actually, from all outward signs, you would think, was a representative of God. It is also funny, as I've already said, how miracles and signs, these personal validations that people get all the way from speaking in tongues to having been healed of diseases, become the greatest source of spiritual pride and vanity that this minister has ever encountered in his career. Now, there is something rather strange about all that when you consider it. Then, of course, there is the use of religious customs to deceive. Going back once again to Deuteronomy, I think there's an interesting little passage in here that's worth pausing and taking a look at. Deuteronomy, this time just before what we read in chapter 13, right at the end of chapter 12, beginning in verse 29. When the Lord your God shall cut off the nations from before you, where you go to possess them, and you succeed them and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you be not snared by following them after they destroyed from before you. Take heed that you don't inquire after their gods, saying, well, now, how did these people serve their gods? I'll serve God that way. He said, you shall not do so to the Lord your God. For every abomination to the Lord which he hates have they done to their God. Even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their gods. Now, mind you, we're not going to question somebody's sincerity in this case. They are as sincere as a human being could ever be to burn their own children in the fire to their gods, right? That's not a question. But here are people who have adopted the customs of Baal, Moloch, all of the different gods, Dagon the fish god, and they have taken these customs, and because they're nice customs, you know, in the main. Now, we're not talking about burning your children, because that's not where it all starts. It starts with nice little customs and ceremonies. But here's God's customs, and here are the pagan God's customs. What God says is, you are not to take these customs and then use them to worship me. We're talking about something quite different from abandoning the worship of God and beginning to worship a pagan god, right? We're talking about grabbing hold of one set of customs and bringing them over here and applying them elsewhere. You see, there's something that many people do not seem to realize, what the object is of Satan's deception. It is not merely the goal to keep you from obeying God. It is not merely to keep you from doing things God's way. It is to keep you from knowing God at all. And it is possible to go through the motions. It is possible to walk through all the ceremony and still not know God. Because the fact of the matter is, whenever you begin to observe the pagan holidays and the pagan customs, when you begin to observe a holiday that talks about Easter bunnies laying eggs and going out and finding the eggs laid by the Easter bunny, when you worship on a holiday that's named after a pagan sex goddess, and all this is here, how does that help you know God? It's very religious. It's very spiritual. And you can feel very inspired about the resurrection from Christ. You can stand on a mountainside and face the sun that's rising and saying, He lives, He lives. Christ Jesus lives in me. He was raised from the dead. Up from the grave He arose to triumph over His foes. And boy, you can feel good about it. Are you going to know God, though? His way or another way? And what does all of the symbolism of Easter have to do with knowing God? Satan, I suppose, must be quite happy to talk about the resurrection. For there is no problem with him knowing that Jesus was raised from the dead. He knows that quite adequately. And he doesn't seem to think it's that effective to try to talk you into believing, although he may have succeeded with a person here and there, but to talk you into believing that Jesus did not rise from the dead. What he's got to be careful about is to make you understand, or not understand, who that Jesus really is, what he is really like, why he was raised from the dead. In other words, that you might not really come to know him. You know, if I decided that I wanted to deceive you, I would have to understand. I would have to somehow get a handle on what you want. I broached this subject early on in the sermon, that if I'm not going to tempt you, I'm not going to be able to deceive you, I'm not going to be able to put a hook into you on something that you don't even want. So I have got to understand not merely your needs. Needs are one thing. Wants are something else. I have to understand what you want. If I can find a way to provide you with what you want, I can gain a measure of power where you are concerned. I can gain influence. If I've got something you want and I give it to you, and maybe it's something I give to you regularly, or something I let you use but I can withhold it, then I have power where you're concerned, do I not? Now, you can, of course, cut it off. You can back away from it. You can refuse it. But your wants actually provide, it's almost like there's a handle hanging out on you here. It's a want. And it gives the devil something he can reach out and take hold of. You can resist, you can fight, you don't have to go along with him, but the handle is there. Now, this is why Jesus told us some of the things that he did. If you'll turn back to the 6th chapter of Matthew, I'd like to emphasize them with this in mind. Matthew chapter 6. He spent quite a bit of time, actually, on this subject, and it has very much to do, you know, the whole segments and so many things he's talking about is don't be careful that people don't deceive you and mislead you. He even goes down and saying, don't let people tell you that I did away with the law. I haven't done away with the law. There is a segment of people whose want is that there should be no law. I believe it was one of the Huxleys who took hold of Darwin's theory and began to advance it, and he admitted openly that one of the reasons that he was a bulldog for Darwin, the reason why he was being so careful to propound his theory, is because it gave him the liberty to practice whatever sexual practices he wanted. He didn't have to feel those Christian restrictions anymore if he could believe that there was no God and no standards. It was a want. So there are people who don't want law, and that want can be exploited. Those other people have to be exploited a different way. Now in Matthew, the 6th chapter, he deals with one of the most obvious wants. Not by any means the only one, but one of the most obvious and pervasive and consistent wants that human beings have. He says in verse 24, no man can serve two masters. He will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Therefore I say unto you, don't take any thought for your life, what you shall eat, what you shall drink, nor yet for your body what you shall put on. Is not the life more than meat? Isn't the body more than raiment? Look at the birds. They don't sow, they don't reap, they don't gather in the barns. Your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you better than they? Well, yes indeed, of course we are. And yet, this want for food, want for clothing, want for shelter, is very much a part of our lives. And it isn't as though we just want clothes. We want those clothes. It isn't just that we want shelter. I want that house. It isn't just, that I want food. I want that food. And all of those wants, and the more specific those wants are, the more awkward or difficult those wants are, the greater the vulnerability is created where those wants are concerned. Once upon a time, there was a prophet. He was a prophet of God because God spoke to him. God actually, gave him words and said, you do this and do that and don't do the other thing. And the man heard him and said, yes, Lord, and so on. He's a prophet. His name was Balaam. Balaam, you have to go back and read that story carefully. He's mentioned in the New Testament as a person who was greedy for reward. And yet, you go back and you read the original story. And a king of Moab, sent some men down to him and said, look, I got these people coming up like a bunch of locusts out of Egypt. They're going to take over my land. I know that whatever you ask God to do, God does. And I want you to come down here and curse these people. And if you do, I'm going to make you a rich man. Now, Balaam had already been told before those men got there that they were coming. God says they're coming. And God says, you're not to go with them. Well, Balaam goes out and he says, well, look, you can give me half your kingdom. And I can only say what God tells me to say. There's something you need to understand, and you will understand it if you read that chapter carefully. Numbers, the 22nd chapter. Balaam wanted to serve God. He really did. He told him again and again, I'm sorry, I can't curse these people. He went all the way down with him. He got up on the mountaintop, looked out over him, and he was just ready to curse, and here comes a blessing. He couldn't help it. And he really wanted to serve God. But he also wanted something else. When they held out that incredible wealth to him, he wanted it. Now, do you think you're capable of putting yourself in his shoes at all? Can you maybe in your mind cast your mind back to realize that this is not a prophet of the devil. He's not a prophet of Satan the devil at all. He's a prophet of God. He is a man who wants to do right. He is a man who wants to speak God's words. He wants to be obedient to God, but at the same time, he wants that money. Now, if that were you, you would have a hard time saying to yourself, boy, if I get that money, I can build a house. And I can put a retirement fund together for my kids. And I can, look at all the things I can do. I can buy clothes, and I can buy jewelry, and I can have chains hanging off of me. Would you feel right about that? Or would you not say to yourself, boy, if I had that money, I could feed people when they're hungry. I could give some money to the poor. And I could get, maybe my message could have broader application. Maybe I could get this out to more people. Maybe if you were in the 20th century, you could say to yourself, boy, if I had that, I could get on television. If I had that, we could double our expansion. We could double what we're able to reach. I suspect that Balaam was all loaded up with worthy reasons why he wanted the money. I suspect that. But of course, we had just already gone through probably in himself the most staggering, the most amazing, the most mind-boggling deception of all, that a man can deceive himself. But you see, there was something there that Balaam wanted. And he wanted it desperately. Now Jesus tells all of us, he says, look at what's going on here. He says, why are you worried, verse 28, about clothes? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They don't work, they don't spin. And I say unto you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Wherefore, if God so clothed the grass of the field, as today is, tomorrow it's burnt, shall he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? And don't take any thought saying, what shall we eat? Or what are we going to drink? Or how are we going to get clothing? After all these things the Gentiles seek, but your heavenly Father knows that you have need of all these things. Seek you first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Take therefore no thought for the morrow. The morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. What do you want? You ever thought about it? One of the most difficult tasks you're ever going to have in your life is to sit down. I'm going to ask you to do it. Maybe tomorrow morning when you get up and you have your cup of coffee in your hand, a little quiet moment. Take yourself a tablet and a pencil and sit down in a quiet spot and start writing down the things that you want with some detail and with some clarity. And just be honest about it. Now, you see, this is probably going to be your only chance to really get honest about this, because if we're sitting down two of us face to face talking about what do you want? We are sometimes very hesitant to admit what we want. Sometimes we don't even know what we want. And if we did know, we don't want to admit it because we might be held responsible for it if somebody gave it to us. And there are all sorts of strange little things that go on inside of us when somebody says, well, what do you want? Even if somebody you're trying to sell your home, somebody says, what do you want for this house? You start hedging immediately because you're not sure if I say this, I could have gotten more. And so it goes. Our wants are varied. We want money. Money is a medium of exchange. It buys things. And not only is it just a thing that we can buy, it gives us what we think is a certain amount of security. We know that money is there. I don't know what I want today, but if the money is there, I'll have the money to get it tomorrow. We want power. We want to be able to influence other people. We want to be able to make things happen, don't we? It's a want that all people have. We want love. It's a very real want. It's a proper want. It's a healthy want. It's a good want. We want it. We want influence. We want food. We want a feeling of self-worth. We want to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror in the morning and say, hey, there's somebody that is valuable, is of some worth, that means something. His life isn't wasted. It's not lost. It's not gone. There's worth there. We want appreciation. And, of course, we want to have our ego scratched. We want to be big. We want to be important. There is that we have to deal with along the way as well. Every one of these wants is a vulnerability. It is an opening. And if you want to be free of deception, you are going to have to pay careful attention to your wants. Because you see, in each and every one of these things that I have mentioned is a vulnerability. You know, even this thing of wanting to be appreciated. The fact that you want that creates not just a chink in your armor, but a very broad avenue through which someone can enter. If you need this, if this is a want that you have of appreciation, and I come along and I regularly, week after week after week, I give you that appreciation, do I gain power over you? Yes, I do. I gain influence. You will come to the place to where you want that, you appreciate that, you need that, and I can exercise a considerable influence over your behavior by threatening to withhold that if you do this or do that, or if you don't do the other. It works that way. It's called flattery. Flattery. Now, you've all been flattered at one time or the other. If you don't know you have, you've been deceived. Just that simple. Because there's always someone who is willing to tell you what you want to hear in order to get some measure, however small, however unimportant, of advantage in the dealings with you. Wants, desires are all open. But you say, well, look, I can't help wanting something. Of course you can't. A want is there. It isn't something you create. But you know, one thing you can do, you can put a watch on them. Like any commander who knows he's got weak spots in the wall is going to get somebody out there to take a look at this and be aware of it. If you can make this little inventory of your wants, and if you can define your wants, if you can not only just say, well, look, I want to be appreciated, if you can begin to define for yourself, how is it that I want to be, what form do I want that appreciation to take? What is it that I want? You might be much more aware of your vulnerability when someone comes along to use that to deceive you somewhere along the line. In Matthew, the 24th chapter, is a very interesting statement, one that we've looked at from a different perspective a lot of times, but I think it's important to consider. Matthew 24, and I'll begin in verse 21. Then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. For the elect's sake, those days should be shortened. Then if any man shall say to you, lo, here is Christ, or there is Christ, don't believe it. For there shall arise false Christs, false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders. Why are they doing this? Because people want to see Christ. Because they want to hear a prophet. Because they want to believe that Christ has returned. They're looking for something they want. A want is being fulfilled. He said they're going to do all this, and they're going to show great signs. They're going to show wonders. because people want to see them. They want some kind of evidence. Insomuch that if it were possible, they should deceive the very elect. Now, you are the elect of God. Is it possible that you could ever be deceived? If it is, and if it ever comes to pass, it will come to pass because someone has given you what you wanted.